Hi, my name is Edda320, and I really like tanks. So much so, in fact, that I've decided to embark on a journey across the internet and gaming world alike to find some of the wackiest, coolest, and best made tanks in video games. I'll be looking at everything from the plausibly realistic to the downright insane.
And of course, it would not be Finland unless we included the BT-42. Insert obligatory Girls in Panzer reference because, let's be honest, that's the only reason any of us even know what this tank is.
So if this sounds like something you're interested in, stick around and listen up, because this is a Tank Enthusiast Reacts to tanks in video games.
Yeah, so here we have me doing actually a separate conquest as Germany, and this is me after completing a mission. I always like to go around the battlefield and repair as many vehicles as I can, and then try to capture them and bring them back into my army. But in this instance, I thought for the video it would be cool to line up all the tanks that I'd captured and show them off. And immediately we have a Valentine. Really cool to see true acknowledgement of Lend-Lease from the British to the Soviet Union. When we think of Lend-Lease to the Soviet Union, we think of Shermans, really. But everything you can think of, the Americans and the British sent some of it. The Americans sent over steel. We sent over trains. We sent over trucks. We sent over jeeps. We sent over half-tracks. And then also, again, the British sent over a lot of things. The Valentine was a tank that the British, had developed as an infantry tank. And it was supposed to be this hybrid of, like, we want an infantry tank, but with the speed of a cruiser tank. And that's the kind of thing that the British are chasing this all throughout World War II, and they never truly get there until Centurion, when they develop the universal tank. So it doesn't end up really working as an infantry tank. Britain moves on. But they lend-lease a bunch to the Soviet Union just to give it to them, and the Soviets actually really like the Valentine. They somewhat fall in love with it, believe it or not, as a light tank. So the Soviets really like the Valentine. They like it in reconnaissance, they like it in light tank roles, and so they continually ask for more, so much so that even when the British stop using the Valentine in their own army, production of the Valentine continues purely to be donated to the Soviet Union. Trying to take a gander at the interior of the tank, and you can see it is modeled, and it is painted white, as all most tank interiors were, except I think the British actually painted theirs a little more like a gray-silver color. But the interior itself is pretty much empty. Right behind it, we saw there a T-26 modified with a flamethrower in the turret. The Soviets loved putting flamethrowers in their tanks. They are like one of the most prominent countries that I know of that did it. Even as far back as the initial design specifications for the T-34, a variant with a flamethrower was requested. Very quickly passing by, a T-34-85 looks really good. I really wish I could pick out the minute modeling details of a T-34 the way I can of a Sherman, but it looks great. I actually really love the way that the Soviet tanks are modeled. I love how the weld seams are so worn, and they almost look like purple. They really stand out, the corners and the weld seams on this tank, and then the periscopes are like a bright, shining blue, which is obviously not true. Like, they would have been glass. They would not have, glowed blue. But we sort of speak this language of, oh, yeah, blue, that means glass. And so and I would actually say that this is an interesting point. Night Shift has mentioned this in his model making videos, where sometimes when you're doing model making, you don't always make something that looks real. You just make something that looks interesting, that is visually, catches your eye, even if it's not like technically what that would have looked like in real life. If rust really would show up like that on this tank, and yeah, if the periscopes would actually, their lenses would be a bright blue, very obvious bright blue. Like, no, those things probably aren't that realistic, but they look really good. Interestingly, it's a bit less pronounced on this KV tank, which is cool. This is a KV-1S, if I'm not mistaken, or the KV-1 Sport, as people like to call it. And I love, in the hatch we can see on the KV-1 here, you can actually see the gun breech and even the DT machine gun at the back of the turret. Really cool. T-34-76 with the hexagonal turret. The hexagonal turret for the T-34-76 will always be the best turret design. You can fight me on that. We get here an M4A2 76W Sherman, VVSS, so a Gen 2 Sherman, but without the horizontal value suspension. I think the Russians do actually get some Shermans with HVSS, but not that many. I do think like the classic Lend-Lease Shermans, the Soviet Union, this is what we think of. But the Soviets did receive. The Soviets received M3 Lees, and then, yeah, the initial early model M4s were given to the Soviets, and they get the 75mm Sherman tanks, mostly M4A2s, because the Soviet Union, obviously, used diesel engines and diesel fuel in their army. T-34 had a diesel engine, all their tanks had diesel engines. That's the one that the Soviets prefer, and America actually does its best to abide by that. There are several notes that I've read where you know, in order to appease Soviet demand, we are going to continue production of whatever, of the M4A2 specifically, but other vehicles and other things. Obviously, in 1944, January of 1944, America officially writes that we are going to cease production of the 75mm gun Shermans, and we're going to start up on the 76. The only exception to that is one final batch of 75mm M4A2 Sherman tanks that was promised to the Soviets, because America recognized the demand of the Soviets and said, let's give them one more batch of the 75s before we push the 76 on them, which I think they already had, and the Soviets were fine with it. But it is definitely fair to say, if you look up pictures of Soviet Shermans, most of them are going to be this configuration. And we see my favorite thing on all tanks of all time ever, the administrative, what I call administrative decals, the USA and the serial number on the hull. Or actually, that's a registration number, excuse me, not a serial number. The writing on the side of the hull, battery charged, dry, coolant installed. All those decals are so freaking cool to like let the Soviets know we got gas in here, we got coolant, you got all your fluids and petrol, oil, and lubricants, or POL. All that's here. And those instructions on the side, those are written in Russian. Hey, like, here's the proper mixture of water and coolant that you need to put into the radiator to keep the engine running well. Here's how much oil it takes, like essentially like quicker mechanical side of things. And then the lift here decals on next to the lifting eyelets. It looks so cool. Like, it just looks so industrial, and I love it. Yeah, it's really cool. I might put up like a picture of the text and a translation here, just so you can see it. And yeah, in the engine deck, we get to see this is now the twin diesel motors, which looks actually quite well modeled. And then even in the cupola, this is by far the most detailed interior we have on, I think, any tank we saw at all. Everything. You've got the turret basket, you've got the gun breech, you've got the recoil guard, you even have the elevation mechanism right there. You don't have the manual traverse. You can't quite see none of that details there, but that's okay. We can excuse that because you can see everything else. Both the gunner and loader seat. Really great detail on that interior for that Sherman. You can tell it's one of the later tanks that they modeled. And we have a Panzer IV-D, which is not modeled correctly. This is a Panzer IV Ostfront D. However, the turret hatches are incorrect. This Ostfront D currently has the split hatches on the sides of the turret. Those split hatches were not introduced until the Ostfront F, which is 2 whole tanks past this. So this is very odd. And a pretty major mistake, I would say, in modeling a Panzer IV, because it's a pretty noticeable change. It also doesn't have the little hood for the signal ports that was on the left side of the turret there, right in the middle where you have that the ventilation, the armored ventilation housing. To the left of it, you've got that little hole. That's supposed to be a port for signals. And yeah, there's no hood on that, what there should be on an Ostfront D. Not always, but there should be. To me, it's a very iconic feature of the Ostfront D. And also, the sprocket is wrong. The sprocket looks like the exact same sprocket they used on the Panzer III, but is definitely not the correct sprocket for the Panzer IV Ostfront D. And then also, it has the cooling vents on the steering brake hatches, which again was not introduced until the Ostfront F. So again, this is a really weird mashup between an Ostfront D and an Ostfront F. Like, it's an Ostfront D 95%. Also on this turret, I'm also again noticing the direct vision blop on the front right cheek of the turret is missing. Of the Ostfront D, both would have been there. They would have had those 2 little bulbs, and those bulbs like slide up and reveal direct vision optics for both the loader and the gunner. On the left side, that is where the gunner's telescopic sight goes, so you can't get rid of that one. And then on the right side, yeah, the loader doesn't need that, so on later Panzer IVs, they got rid of it. But in the Ostfront D, that's still there. So again, that's like a feature of like a late model F, or an early model G even. So yeah, once again, like a weird thing from an Ostfront F that they've taken and then put back on the D. The 88 flak bus, as people so call it, is usable in this game, as it was a very, very prominent anti-tank gun in World War II. There's a lot of debate onto, was the 88 intended to be an anti-tank gun? When was it first used? From what I know, the first use of the 88 as an anti-tank gun actually goes all the way back, again, to the Spanish Civil War. Spanish Civil War super slept on for tank development. The first, if I recall, the Tank Encyclopedia, there's a video that they put out actually pretty recently, says that the first instance that an 88 was used against tanks was during the Spanish Civil War, and it was against 2 T-26s using high explosive shells. So AP, that kind of tells me that AP wasn't there yet, or AP wasn't developed yet, so the gun was very much meant for an anti-aircraft role, and then for whatever reason, in this instance, they saw these 2 T-26s and said, quick, point it down and shoot. I think someone in the comments of the Tank Encyclopedia video called it like killing a spider with a shotgun. The definition of seal clubbing, my god. It becomes like no longer like we're only giving these to flak cores, like we're actually going to issue these out. Nice cameo from a Panzer IIIL. Yeah, the main reason I wanted to show this off is because I noticed we have, I don't know how my eye caught this, but it did. On the left side of the hull, or I guess the right side if you're in the tank, but left side from what we're seeing right here, there is that bar next to the engine intakes, and it is positioned there for the antenna. So the antenna is currently up, but the idea is that the antenna can fold down, and the antenna wire fits into a channel that is cut into that bar, and it acts as like a little protector for when the antenna is down. It's an antenna protector. But in this model, in the game, it is modeled as just a solid bar. There's no groove cut into it for the antenna to fold down into. And at first I thought like, oh, like small oversight, they probably don't know what that part is used for, they just modeled it as a brick, you know, not their fault, whatever, it's an RTS, you know, don't expect too much detail, like, good for them for at least trying. When I continued looking, I found the Sturmgeschütz Ostfront F behind it, and I noticed that it had 2 antennas, and those ones did have the correct channels cut in them. So for whatever reason for this, they understood the purpose and they were like, oh yeah, make sure we model those grooves so the antennas can fold. But for the Panzer III, they did not, for whatever reason. I'm sure it's just a modeling oversight, but I thought that was a funny detail. And also, I do believe, actually, I didn't even notice it this time, but I was just looking at, we have a cameo for the Panzer II, and I think the Panzer II, yes, the Panzer II also has the groove correctly modeled, correctly channeled into that bar for the antenna protector. Actually, if anything, it looks like on the Panzer II, it is the most prominent out of all 3. I hadn't noticed that until I was reviewing this footage right now for the Panzer II. Another quick cameo from the Panzer IIIL, and a cameo from the Su-76M specifically. Su-76 is a assault gun. The Australian Armor and Artillery Museum just quite recently, as of recording this video, hit my table, put out a video on their Su-76M that they have in their museum, and they, explained it, talked about it. I will quickly summarize a little bit for you. The Su-76 begins development in late 1942. The Soviets are looking for a new mobile gun for infantry support. It's meant to be an SPG. It's a self-propelled gun for infantry support. They look at a couple different options. They look at a 37, they look at a 45, and they look at the 76. Eventually the 76 is chosen, and the prototype was the Su-12, I think they said it was, that ends up being selected, and Su-12 is developed into the Su-76. It is built on the chassis of the T-70, which is also quite recently put out. If you'd like to know more about the T-70, I talked about it in the Tank Enthusiast Reacts to Hell Let Loose video. So the Su-76 is built on the T-70, but it is an elongated T-70. It's got an extra road wheel, or an extra pair of road wheels, one on each side. According to Australian Armor Museum, they say that it is the second most produced Soviet tank next to the T-34. And I do believe that. The vehicle was built originally for infantry support as a mobile support gun, but in a pinch it could be used in the anti-tank role. Yeah, and then I wanted to take the opportunity to compare, because I was doing a mission and just recording it, and I wanted to take a chance to compare what we had here, a Panzer IV Ostfront G with a Panzer IV Ostfront D. And yeah, we should notice a couple of differences with these, and some of which aren't there. First of all, the sprockets. Again, the sprockets on the D and the G here are identical. They should not be. The Panzer IV Ostfront D had a sprocket. Early production E's also had the D style sprocket, but during the very early on in E production, they switched to a new sprocket. The E and the F Panzer IV have their own sprocket, which these look the most like Panzer IV F sprockets. Although again, they look like Panzer III sprockets. They actually don't even look like any model of sprocket the Panzer IV ever had. Oh, well, I guess, yeah, the G had the same as the F, because the G is basically just an F, but with the long 75. And then they make changes to it as it goes, but yeah, the G also has that one. And then the H and J get yet another new model of sprocket. D and the G here should have 2 different sprockets, and they do not. Same thing also with the idler wheels. The idler wheels on these 2 tanks should be different, and so should the road wheels. The running gear. The running gear of these 2 tanks should not be identical, and they are. The turret features of these tanks should not be identical, and they are. One thing that they did get right is the shape of the G. The roof of the G's turret is elongated, so that the cupola no longer protrudes out the back of the turret. It no longer, sticks out and has a little bulge there at the back. That was something they corrected on the Ostfront E, and that carried into the Ostfront F and G. But the Ostfront D was the last Panzer IV that did not have that. Also, this Ostfront G should not have that signal port on the left, like what the Panzer IV-D has. I do believe by the time G was happening, they had gotten rid of that second signal port, and the only port on the roof of these tanks would have been the one ventilator right there on the right. Oh yeah, also I do believe the Panzer IV-D, I didn't even notice this, but the Panzer IV-D should not have ventilated grills on the engine deck. That was introduced in the E into the F. Maybe you may have seen some late Model Ds actually with it, late Model Ds, but if we're gonna do like a box standard, like a stereotypical Ostfront D, I personally would not include those. Now that makes me curious at the vision visor. The visor for these two tanks is the same, and it also shouldn't be. The this Model D here also has the pivoting driver's viewport, where you have the viewport and then you have this little piece of armor above. You have a little knob inside the tank, and you'll turn that knob and it'll rotate that armor housing to close it down in front of you, kind of like a knight's helmet, the visor coming down. The Ostfront D should not have that. The Ostfront D should have the earlier style sliding shutter, where it just closes up and down. It's not like a rotating, again, like a knight's visor. They did, however, somehow get correct the two different bow machine guns. You can see the Ostfront G has a standard, like a ball MG port there, and then the Ostfront D has that square bracket MG port. That is correct. It also doesn't have on the wall there, on that, you see how the driver's side of the hull, like that asymmetric front hull where the driver's side pokes forward a bit, there's that middle bit, that angled middle bit. There should be a hole for a pistol port right there on that middle angle, and there is not. So yeah, this Panzer IV-D is a really interesting, a really weird hybrid. It has a lot of weird late features. And here we are. You all thought I might make this video without mentioning Finland, didn't you? Quite interestingly that they would add Finland before a lot of other factions, but it's cool because we get a chance to look at some pretty awesome and interesting Finnish tanks. Now, I'm going to be fully transparent with you. I'm not an expert on Finnish tanks. However, I do have a friend who is. So, huge shout out to my buddy Lottie for giving me the following info. So the first tank we have you being able to use as Finland in this game is the Renault FT-17. Obviously, huge tank out of World War I, very, very widely popular across the world. Every country and their mom was buying them up. Except for one problem. Finland did not exist in World War I. So how did Finland get their hands on them? They end up declaring independence from the Russian Empire in 1917 at the start of the Russian Revolution. After gaining their independence from the Russian Empire, they made some negotiations to receive 32 Renault FT-17 tanks from the Russians to help them build their defense arsenal. Of these 32 tanks, 18 of them were fitted with the 8mm Hotchkiss 1914 machine guns and designated female tanks, and the remaining 14 kept the original 37mm gun and were named male. These tanks were used throughout the 1920s and 30s as training vehicles before finally being phased out in 1939, where they were all sent back to be displayed in museums. At the Palora Tank Museum. I hope I pronounced that correctly, sorry. Now, the model itself actually looks really good, except for one jarring feature that I think we are all noticing, which is that the tracks don't move. The tracks literally do not spin, do not rotate, do not go with this tank's movement, which is, to be quite honest, a pretty massive oversight. I really don't know how they missed that, but okay. Secondly, as what Lati tells me, the numbers of this tank are not accurately modeled. Although Finland did put numbers on their tanks, obviously, you would need some way to denote them, they were not this style. The text, I suppose the font, the style of the numbers on the side of this tank's turret are Soviet styling, where the Finnish had their own. I'll go ahead and put a link in the description down below to a Tank Encyclopedia article that Lati says has way more information on these tanks, and quote, is an outstanding article on this particular vehicle, which I could not do justice to. End quote from Lati. So hey, go check out that Tank Encyclopedia article if you'd like to learn out more about the Renault FT-17 in Finnish service. And the next tank we see available for the Finnish is the Vickers E, or the Vickers Export, which is a British original tank that was developed by Vickers, mostly for the export market. Actually, I don't believe they ever saw service with the British, but I'm not a British armored expert quite yet, so tell me that I'm wrong. Finland ordered about 32 of these tanks in the mid-1930s. Originally, they ordered them with no guns and no armaments, no radios, no anything. Actually, even some sources say that no seats even were in the tanks. They ordered them completely bare bones with the idea of to buy them cheap and then fit the tanks with domestically produced components, such as the 37mm Bofors. They would get manufactured locally, licensed, produced from Poland, I do believe. They would fit their own machine guns to the tank. As they did, they fitted their own Maxim design coaxial machine gun. And as you can see by the model, no, that is not a mistake, they did fit a submachine gun as this kind of hull machine gun. The M31 Finnish submachine gun that, from what I'm reading, is actually a variant of that submachine gun specifically designed to fit into the Finnish Vickers E. I am checking out a source that JaegerPlatoon.net that Lati gave me and says is very accurate, and I've been reading this just now with the recording pause, and it is incredibly interesting stuff. They ordered the tanks in the mid-1930s, but there was a delay in the delivery, and they don't actually show up in time for the Winter War. One batch of Vickers ends up getting equipped in Britain anyways before shipment. Just because the Finnish are like, hey, this is taking too long, just give us fully equipped tanks. So normal, fully equipped Vickers tanks ends up in Finland right at the very tail end of the Winter War. And then finally, Finland gets the 32 tanks they ordered, and they build the proper Vickers E. Or as it was known in Finnish service, the Pansari. I think if I just try every possible pronunciation, I'll get it right? The Pansari PS-161, which is quite interesting because the Panzer IV was known as the SDKFC-161. Interesting and weird connection point. As for accuracy, Lati notes that the Randell put onto this is not accurate, and this actually even I knew, is that Randell was not used until after World War II. Pre-World War II and during World War II, the Finnish quite famously used the swastika, or their own version. I'll put the Finnish official word for it. Obviously, like, the Finnish didn't call it a swastika. They have their own name for the logo, or more recognizably, and even in the photos that I was just looking up earlier for this tank to test accuracy myself, a lot of these tanks were painted with a white and blue, or a white, blue, white band around the top of the turret, which I actually think is a massive missed opportunity because that looks really cool. I guess just for uniformity's sake, they just put the roundel on everything and called it a day. The model looks good, but the paint scheme is not quite accurate. The game also allows us to spawn in a Soviet T-50 tank. I am told that the Finnish actually only managed to capture a single T-50 tank, so this is not the kind of thing that they had produced domestically, only one that they ever captured during the Continuation War in 1941. They put it into service with a heavy tank unit, which is quite funny, and put on some applique armor, so it had a thicker armor at the front and on the turrets, bringing it up to 51mm. The tank was beat to hell, but ultimately survived the war and is still around to this day, which is actually really, really cool. So this is one of those funny video game inaccuracies where, because Finland only ever got their hands on one T-50 ever, theoretically you should not be able to spawn in more than one, but you know. Again, as far as the paint scheme and the roundels go, it's safe to assume that, yeah, that blue and white roundel is a post-World War II thing, so any of these tanks that are being portrayed as Finnish Winter War, Continuation War, World War II, they should all have usually the swastika is the one that I'm seeing in photos and such. So for censorship reasons, I can see why they're not doing it, but it is worth noting that that is technically, we like to be pedantic here, technically that is inaccurate. And of course, it would not be Finland unless we included the BT-42. Insert obligatory Girls in Panzer reference because, let's be honest, that's the only reason any of us even know what this tank is. Rightfully so, because this is a really cool and unique tank that does deserve some recognition. This tank was originally developed as a heavy assault howitzer. The idea being to quickly just drive up, hit a bunker, hit an emplacement, hit an entrenched position with some large caliber HE, and crack it open for advancing infantry. They were all built on stolen BT-7 tanks. Only about 18 of these tanks, the BT-42s, were ever made, and the gun that they used was a British 114mm howitzer, which you might think is it's a very odd caliber to use for this purpose, because it is an old surplus World War I howitzer. So very much repurposing an outdated gun. The only thing about this tank that is Finnish original is the turret. The turret is an in-house design where they had to find a way to fit a howitzer onto a BT chassis. This tank really is the epitome of everything that all my chatters beg for me to build in Sprocket. some tank that is incredibly fast, incredibly lightly armored, and has just the most stupidly large and overpowered gun. Stupid. It's objectively a dumb idea, putting a very large caliber gun onto a light tank. As you might guess, unfortunately, I am saddened to say that I have been informed that the BT-42 was not a very successful tank. I would imagine that it was simply too lightly armored, and it would probably roll up to the lines and then get sniped by an anti-tank gun. The howitzer was probably effective when it was used properly, but I have been given a single combat excerpt in which one BT-42 encountered Soviet infantry, fired 6 high explosive shells at them before being attacked by a T-34, which hit its turret. The lieutenant, i.e. the tank commander, and the loader were instantly killed, and the driver was the only able to escape and make it back to finish lines. Occasionally it was used against tanks, but it wasn't supposed to be. It was sort of like a, oh shit, there's a tank, quick shoot type thing. But yeah, I'm afraid to say that everyone's favorite Girls in Panzer tank is not all that it's cracked up to be. Famously, one of these tanks is still surviving to this day at the Parola Museum in Finland. The people who made the show, like the producers of Girls in Panzer, managed to get together, I think it was like $27,000 or something like that, managed to get a bunch of money together to donate to the Finnish museum where this tank was stored. They were able to use that money to build a roof over the line of tanks that were previously just sitting outdoors in the elements. Heartwarming story for Girls in Panzer and tank enthusiasts everywhere. Especially Finnish tank enthusiasts, I would imagine. We had to include it in the show. I mean, this is like by far the most iconic Finnish tank of all time. And again, I think I'm obligated to say, the roundel is not accurate. These tanks would have had swastikas on them. Not sure how well that would have gone in Großen Panzer. I'm glad that they replaced it with the Jotka Soto logo, because yeah, that would have been weird. The Sturmgeschütz is also prominently featured in the game as part of the Finnish armed forces, and the history of this one is actually really interesting from what I'm reading. In the game, it is called the Stu 40G, and I thought at first that was a typo, because obviously we would know this as the Stug, but it is not. It actually is the Stu 40G. In Finnish, the tank was known as the Stumi, which I think is really fucking cute. It was quite successful with the Finnish, as it was with the Germans. I mean, as we know, that the Sturmgeschütz ends up being the most mass-produced tank of the German army in all of World War II. They build a little over 10,000 of them, and Finland ends up getting its hands on about 50 of them. Or 50, I think they buy, 59. They buy the first batch of 30 in 1943, so these are actually bought from Germany. They're not stolen. They are purchased from Germany in 1943, and then another batch of 29 are bought in 1944. A lot of people forget, like, Finland's involvement in World War II after we know the Continuation War and the Winter War, but, you know, Germany sees an opportunity here. You know, Germany's operating up in Norway. They have kind of Armstrong Sweden into being, like, odd friends with them. They've conquered Denmark. Those Nordic countries up north, Northern Europe, are very much, like, kind of not on Germany's side, but, you know, they're being influenced, they're being strong-armed by Germany. And especially in Finland's case, Germany is able to slide into those DMs and go to Finland and say, hey, I hate the Soviets too. Let's work together. And I do believe that the swastika use in the Finnish army is purely coincidental. I don't believe the Finnish, like, joined up on the Nazi cause or anything. They just so happened to also be using the swastika, and then also just so happened to fight alongside the Germans against the Soviets during World War II. Kind of weird how that happens, but point being, they were allied enough with the Germans in 1943 and 1944 to actually purchase Sturmgeschütz from them. And I do believe, if I recall, in my Panzer IV video, they also end up purchasing some Panzer IVs from Germany as well. So the alliance, or the acquaintance, was there. From what I've read, they were beloved by the Finnish troops. They were resilient, they had a hard-hitting gun, and were definitely, for the time, the most modern tanks in the Finnish arsenal. And they actually served with Finland all the way up until 1959, which is pretty impressive. One of the few other countries I know, I think it would have been them and Spain probably, would have been, you know, the two nations that operated the Sturmgeschütz, at least, for that long, especially post-World War II. As for Finnish-specific modifications, seems like the Finnish were quite keen on adding more armor to these vehicles. Obviously, the sort of concrete armor look is quite iconic, but from what I do believe, that was also done by the Germans. I don't think that the concrete armor specifically is Finnish original. What is Finnish original are these extra armored bits we can see both above the driver's visor and on the right side of the hull, in front of the concrete armor on the Stugs. Also, much like the Panzer IV Ostfront D that we had earlier in the game, this Sturmgeschütz seems to be an awkward combination of multiple Stugs. Particularly this Sturmgeschütz seems to have the earlier style mantlets, that like upside down trapezoid shape that is indicative of an earlier model Stug. Finland did have these, but they would not have had the concrete armor. They would not have had the logs on the side, because actually, believe it or not, I had just now learned that the logs actually are Finnish original. Like the Finns did standardize those 3 logs on the side of the tank. They're one of the only countries that I know of that would have standardized like logs being on your tank, specifically as armor. So when I'm reading, it was actually used as armor, and also in case the tank gets stuck. Obviously, the Soviets will end up also doing the same thing with the iconic Soviet log in the Cold War. I'm not going to say they got the idea from the Finns, but maybe they did. Extra track armor was used, and all of these little Finnish-specific upgrades. A lot of those Finnish-specific upgrades were not done to these earlier model with the block mantlets. So this seems to be a interesting combination of early model Stug with late style Finnish modifications. Also, if this is supposed to be a later style Stumi, the logs, the concrete armor, all the extra Finnish modifications, it should not only have the pig nose mantlets, but it should also have Zimrit. So believe it or not, the Finnish did actually get some of their Sturmgeschütz with Zimrit as well. And again, obligated to say, the paint job is not accurate. There should be a swastika on this tank. And the KV-1 in Finnish service. Yep, this is another Soviet tank that the Finnish stole. The Finnish were able to capture exactly 2 KV-1s from the Soviets during World War II. One of them was a KV-1E mod 1940, and one of them was a KV-1 model 1942. They were both taken into Finnish service, where I do believe that the KV-1E mod 1940 was redesignated as the KV-1B, and the KV-1 mod 1942 was redesignated as the KV-1A. These tanks remained in Finnish service from 1942 till the end of World War II, and both of these KV-1s are still in Finland to this day at the Parola Tank Museum. And once again, the roundel is not accurate. And yet another tank that I was really surprised to see available for the Finnish faction here in the game, the JSU-152. I say JSU-152 instead of ISU-152 because the Finnish supposedly called them JSUs. For those of you who don't know the confusion, the name of the tank is the Joseph Stalin. In English, we say Joseph Stalin, so actually in English it should be, to us, the JSU, or the JS, for Joseph Stalin. But in the Russian language, it's Joseph Stalin. It kind of starts with an I. So it's actually quite interesting that, we all think of it as the IS and the ISU because it's actually kind of us giving up and saying that, yeah, the English interpretation is incorrect. The Russian one with the I is correct. So it's actually quite respectful to Russia and the original designers that we even in English, call it the IS and the ISU. The Finnish apparently did not care. They called it the JSU as for Joseph Stalin. Much like the KVs, only 2 of these tanks were captured, both in 1944, and they were basically same thing. They were kind of used, they were okay, and then, actually one of them was destroyed in combat, and then recaptured by the Soviets, and then the other one is still around in Finland to this day in the Parola Museum. There's quite a funny excerpt that I was provided here that I think might be quite fun to read. The Finnish army knew this assault gun as the JSU-152 and captured 2 of them during World War II. Both of these were captured the 25th of June 1944 near some crossroads in places that I cannot pronounce. One of the 2 captured vehicles was captured basically intact, even if abandoned by its crew. It was captured about 700 meters from crossroads on the road leading to place. Taken immediately to Finnish use, it was quickly repaired with Finnish insignia and lost in battle just 4 days later. That day, it was sent to counterattack with a mixed 4-man crew gathered for the last minute. The driver had earlier served as the driver of the KV-1, one of the 2 KV-1s that they had some time to study the assault gun, the JSU. But the other 3 crewmates were picked for the job just half an hour before launching the counterattack, and had earlier served in the T-28 medium tank. JSU-152 was leading the Finnish counterattack from crossroads on a city leading towards the city of place, when it found itself fighting 2 T-34-85 tanks. Captured JSU-152 fired at them but missed its target, And then both Soviet T-34-85 tanks hit the front hull of the JSU-152 and made its crew to bail out and abandon the vehicle. Later, Soviet-taken photographs indicate that this was probably a smart move, since the photos show signs of follow-up shots causing a large explosion that destroyed the abandoned assault gun. So, yeah, the second JSU that they had captured was subsequently destroyed after being sent out with a mixed bag crew picked half an hour before battle, only 4 days after it was captured. So, maybe showing the desperation of the Finnish here. And also, I would have to say that the roundel is incorrect. At the very end there, I liked just showing off the Soviet JSU-152, and just there I wanted to get a chance. Does that actually say JSU in the game? Like in the Finnish model, does the game actually call it? It does. Hey, good props on the game. Yeah, the Finnish one is legit designated the JSU-152, and the Russian one is designated the ISU-152. So they're actually named differently in the game as well. That's really, really cool. So I think that's going to do it for me for this episode of Tank Enthusiast Reacts. This has been a long one. This has been literally 3.5 hours of raw footage, of rambling. I don't know how I'm going to cut this out. I don't know what this is going to look like, but hey, rambling about tanks is always fun. I enjoy doing it. Hopefully you enjoyed watching it. If you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, do all that fun YouTube stuff that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. Donate to the Patreon. It helps me fund this channel and continue making videos for you guys, research, cameras, everything I need. Check out the live streams if you haven't already. I stream every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we play all sorts of games. I try to do Tankery Tuesdays, where I play tank games on Tuesdays, and Thursdays and Saturdays are whatever else we want. If no one else got me, I know the fucking Battlefield 1 soundtrack got me. You know who doesn't got me? You in chat. OMG, he said P, ha ha ha. Fuck you, okay? I was just trying to be nice and answer your question and do what you were trying to make me do. You have no influence on me. Chat, I don't listen to anything you say. Just because you tell me to do it doesn't mean I'm gonna do it. I'm not your plaything. I'm a streamer. I have a personality and I have desires and hopes and dreams. I'm not just your little plaything. Yes, I'm here to entertain you. Yes, I'm here to make sure you have a good time. Yes, I'm here for you. But that doesn't mean I can do anything you make me do. It's not true. And join my Discord as well, where you get to talk to me and all of your other tank enthusiast, autist, nerd friends who weirdly simp over me sometimes. And I get it. I do get it. I'm pretty awesome. But I also don't get it, you know? It's a weird, YouTube thing. Well, anyway, thank you so much for watching this episode of Tank Enthusiast Reacts on Gates of Hell Ostfront, Call to Arms, Gates of Hell Ostfront, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye-bye! Roll the Markiplier outro. Roll the, Markiplier where he goes, bye-bye! And then he does the... Should I just do the Markiplier outro? That would be so funny. Wait, let's... Bye-bye! No, actually, no, that would be lame. No, guys, I'm not gonna do the Markiplier outro. I'm not gonna do it. Ah! It's literally 3:43 in the morning right now. What am I doing?